Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving into an absolutely critical, uncompromising mission for this explainer. We are taking a hard look at eradicating bribery, corruption, and modern slavery right out of procurement. If you're operating out there in global supply chains, you already know these aren't just, theoretical risks sitting in a textbook somewhere. They are very real, very present threats to operational integrity. So we're going to break down exactly what our professional standards demand of us. Let's get into it. Think about a solid shield with a massive, glowing red crack running right down the middle of it. That fracture represents a really harsh reality for all of us. Just one unethical decision, a single hidden case of exploitation, or even a seemingly small overlooked bribe, well, that can completely collapse trust that literally took decades to build. Procurement is the absolute first line of defense against these unethical practices. You are the gatekeepers. If you don't catch it, it goes straight into your organization's bloodstream. Okay, let's dive into this and look at what we're covering today. First, we'll look at Commitment 3 of the CIPS Code of Conduct. Second, we're tackling the major risks, bribery, corruption, and modern slavery. Third, we'll talk about prevention by spotting those sneaky red flags. Fourth, we'll go over your reporting responsibilities. And finally, we'll learn how to apply a 5-step ethical check. The core thesis behind all this is super simple. Ethical procurement means actively fighting exploitation, not just passively avoiding it. Right, Section 1, Commitment to Active Protection. To really grasp this, we need to shift our mindset away from just looking at global problems from afar and instead zero in on the specific professional standards we must uphold every single day. So we are moving totally away from passive compliance. That old school way of just checking boxes and crossing your fingers hoping for the best. Instead, we are pushing hard into active protection. Commitment 3 demands an absolute zero-tolerance policy for bribery and corruption. It means you're proactively identifying risks and conducting really robust, continuous due diligence across the whole supply chain. It's simply not enough to just say, well, I'm not corrupt. No, you have to actively protect your people, your suppliers, and your organizational trust. Moving on to Section 2, Identifying Risks and Red Flags. Now that we understand the active stance we've got to take, let's talk about the specific enemies we are actually looking for. Because here's the chilling truth about all this. These severe threats do not always announce themselves. They love to hide right in plain sight during your daily operations. Let's break these threats down into 3 main buckets: financial, human, and integrity. Financially, sure, we have outright bribery. But you need to pay really close attention to facilitation payments. These are those small, unofficial payments supposedly used to just speed things up. They're insidious, and yeah, they're entirely illegal. Under the human category, we're keeping an eye out for modern slavery and human rights violations, forced labor, and unsafe conditions that suppliers might try to sweep under the rug. Finally, integrity covers conflicts of interest, where personal influence totally overrides objective business decisions. The really crucial point here: even indirect involvement can trigger massive legal penalties, destroy your reputation, and get suppliers excluded. Ignorance is absolutely not a defense. So how do we actually catch this stuff? Well, you need to train yourself to spot critical red flags hidden deep within contracts and daily ops. We're talking about things like unusual payment requests, like, say, someone asking you to wire money to some unverified third-party agent in a totally different country. Watch out for vague contracts that have zero transparency. On the human side of things, look out for restricted worker movement or clearly poor labor conditions when you do site visits. And listen, if a supplier is refusing to allow audits or won't let you interview their workers, that is a massive flashing red light. The gold standard best practice here is mandatory third-party audits and rock-solid auditable documentation. Which brings us to Section 3, Reporting and Ethical Leadership. Okay, you've spotted a red flag. What happens next? Just identifying the problem is only half the battle. Now we need to focus on structural solutions. Let this sink in for a second. Silence protects misconduct. It's that simple. If you see something wrong, you have an absolute, non-negotiable obligation to report those suspected unethical practices immediately. You can use your internal channels or official CIPS whistleblowing procedures. And remember, protection against retaliation is completely standard. But let me be super clear on this. Failing to report suspected misconduct is in itself a direct breach of the Code of Conduct. When you stay silent, you literally become part of the problem. Reporting is how you protect people, protect your organization, and protect your own integrity. And all of this builds into your broader career through what we call the procurement ethics pyramid. Down at the foundation, we've got basic legal compliance, following anti-bribery laws. But honestly, that's just the bare minimum. Moving up the pyramid, we hit operational integrity. That's where your continuous due diligence and your reporting happen. But true ethical leadership, the kind that builds real, sustainable trust over time, requires you to operate exclusively at the absolute peak. It's about setting the standard yourself, not just following the rules because you have to. All right, Section 4, Solving Real-World Ethical Dilemmas. We've covered the theory, we know the risks, and we understand the structure. Now it's time to put your competence to the test with a high-stakes, real-world scenario. Here is your scenario. We call it the customs dilemma. Imagine a supplier in a high-risk region offers a small facilitation payment to clear some really urgent goods faster. During your site visit, you also happen to notice poor working conditions. The supplier just shrugs it off and says, hey, this is standard local practice. Meanwhile, your own operations team is breathing down your neck, practically screaming that any delays will completely wreck delivery targets. The pressure is seriously on. So, I literally want you to pause this explainer right now. Consider all the combined ethical risks here. What is your immediate next step? Pause, think it through, and press play when you've got your answer. Okay, let's resolve that tension. If you are ever in doubt, just run your decision through the 5-step ethical check. Number 1, is it legal? Well, a facilitation payment is a bribe, so no. 2, is it transparent? 3, is it fair? 4, would I be comfortable seeing this on the front page of a newspaper tomorrow morning? And 5, does it protect stakeholder trust? The absolute golden rule here is this. If you hesitate on literally any of those questions, you stop and you escalate immediately. In this scenario, the correct action is to outright refuse the payment, formally report your concerns regarding those working conditions, and suspend supplier engagement pending a full investigation. You do not compromise, period. And that brings us to our core takeaways for today. Number 1, actively root out bribery and modern slavery. Number 2, rigorously train yourself to spot those red flags and execute deep, continuous due diligence. Number 3, always report suspected practices, because failing to act actively enables the misconduct. And number 4, uphold a zero-tolerance standard without any exceptions. In our upcoming final explainer in this series, we're going to explore professional proficiency, legal compliance, and how to embed this code into your organization's very DNA. But I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. True integrity is tested the most when there is no explicit rule telling you exactly what to do. Think about what that really means for your next major supply chain decision. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll catch you in the final part.
Learning reinforcement.
Imagine you're staring down a critical delivery target. Your operations team is screaming for parts. The production line is an hour from shutting down, and every passing second costs the company money. Your supplier calls with a lifeline. They offer to make a small, off-the-books payment to customs to push your urgent shipment through, shrugging it off as standard local practice. On the surface, you see a standard, clean shipment. Remember your last site visit to the supplier, though? You noticed restricted worker movement and poor labor conditions. Behind that clean box is another reality, one wrapped in the heavy chains of exploitation. Under that immense pressure, do you pay the fee to save the quarterly target, or do you blow the whistle and risk a catastrophic operational delay? A single compromised choice to clear customs collapses trust built over decades, exposing your entire supply chain to systemic failure. Commitment 3 of the CIPS Code of Conduct transforms procurement from a clerical function into an active defense system against global exploitation. Moving from passive compliance to active protection provides the only effective strategy to safeguard your people, your operations, and the integrity of your organization. Let's categorize the specific threats inside that supplier's offer. In the financial column, that small fee is a facilitation payment, a gateway to bribery. In the human column, poor working conditions indicate modern slavery. Finally, the integrity column shows how pressure creates conflicts of interest. Even indirect involvement with these suppliers exposes you and your organization to severe legal penalties and permanent reputational ruin. Accurately identifying and labeling these distinct threat categories is the required first step in diagnosing a compromised supply chain. You might wonder how a compromised supplier managed to infiltrate the network to begin with. The answer usually lies in missed early warning signs. This visual highlights how to spot red flags. The magnifying glass scanning the contract reveals vague terminology and unusual payment requests. Moving down the list, physical red flags like restricting worker movement or resisting audits indicate they are hiding exploitation. The required countermeasure to these tactics is robust, continuous due diligence. You must execute thorough risk assessments long before a shipment ever reaches a border. Ignoring early indicators directly leads to the high-stakes operational crises we are examining today. When you discover these practices, you face a hard reality. Staying quiet to protect a delivery target is a direct breach of the CIPS code. Your reporting obligations are mandatory. Following this sequence of whistleblowing icons, you must report suspected unethical practices immediately, using internal channels or official CIPS whistleblowing procedures. Standard protocols include protections for whistleblowers against any form of retaliation. Reporting fulfills your professional obligation to protect vulnerable people and maintain the integrity of the supply chain. Let's return to our customs dilemma. The operations team is still waiting for an answer. To resolve this, we process the scenario through the 5-step ethical check. Is a facilitation payment legal? No. Under anti-bribery standards, off-the-books payments are a crime. Is it transparent? By definition, no. It bypasses official systems. Moving down, is it fair? This payment masks workforce exploitation. If this hit the front page, it links your brand to modern slavery. Read the red warning. If you hesitate on even one question, stop and escalate immediately. Because the scenario fails every level of the check, legality, transparency, and fairness, the verdict is to refuse the payment, formally report the labor concerns, and suspend the supplier pending investigation. Using this framework provides a consistent pathway through operational pressure, replacing impulse with a structured sequence of objective checks. Look at this 3-tiered procurement ethics pyramid. Focus on the base layers. Strict legal compliance stops the bribe, while operational integrity forces deep due diligence into worker conditions. Now look at the glowing red peak. Navigating complex gray areas without compromising your standards is what elevates you to true ethical leadership. Ultimately, your integrity is tested most when no explicit rule tells you exactly what to do. In Part 5, we explore how to embed this ethical DNA into your organization's culture. A single localized decision, a hidden bribe, or a turned blind eye to forced labor rarely stays local. It introduces a fatal vulnerability into a supply chain, cascading through interconnected networks until the central hub completely collapses. Procurement professionals sit precisely at these intersection points. We serve as the primary line of defense against this systemic failure. Relying on contractual clauses alone represents an outdated assumption of passive compliance. The modern standard demands the active protection of people, suppliers, and organizational trust. This mandate is codified in CIPS Commitment 3, the professional obligation to proactively eradicate unethical practices from the supply chain. The first requirement of this commitment is strict enforcement. Organizations must maintain an absolute zero-tolerance policy for bribery and corruption. The second requirement shifts operations from reaction to prevention. Procurement teams must actively identify and eliminate exploitation risks before they infiltrate the organization. Operationally, this translates to executing robust, continuous due diligence across the entire supply chain, extending visibility deep into sub-tier operations. Culturally, it requires cultivating an environment where unethical behavior is reported immediately, without fear of retaliation or favor toward long-standing partners. Passive compliance is now a professional liability. Active defense is the required operational baseline to secure supply chains against hidden vulnerabilities. To engineer active defense mechanisms, we use the procurement ethics pyramid. The foundation is legal compliance. Here we confront primary threats, starting with bribery and corruption, offering or accepting value to influence decisions. Closely related are facilitation payments, small unofficial payments to speed routine processes, carrying identical legal risk. Next is modern slavery and human rights violations, hiding deep in supply chains. Finally, conflicts of interest occur when personal influence compromises professional objectivity. It is critical to understand the rule of indirect equivalence here. Legal liability, reputational damage, and industry exclusion apply fully even if an offense is committed indirectly by a sub-tier supplier or a third-party agent. A breach at this level bypasses standard contractual protections. Failing to secure this legal foundation leaves an organization exposed to severe legal penalties and lasting reputational damage. Building upon that base, we construct the middle layer, operational integrity. This layer acts as an active scanning filter, interrogating the upward flow of supply chain data to catch specific warning signs known as red flags. The first warning sign emerges through unusual payment requests or unverified third-party agents. The second appears in documentation, excessively vague contractual structures, and a distinct lack of transparency. The third is environmental, visible indicators of restricted worker movement or poor labor conditions. The fourth flag is behavioral, suppliers actively resisting external audits or direct worker interviews. When a red flag triggers the system, specific operational countermeasures must deploy. The first required response is executing continuous, thorough risk assessments on the flagged entity. The second countermeasure bypasses supplier resistance by mandating independent, third-party audits to verify actual conditions on the ground. The third is maintaining rigorous, auditable documentation at every step to provide a defensible record of your due diligence. Operational integrity functions as a critical translation layer. It converts vague suspicions and localized anomalies into actionable, verifiable data points that demand a professional response. Once operational integrity verifies a red flag, procurement professionals have an immediate obligation. The findings must be reported. This process utilizes established internal organizational whistleblowing channels, or if necessary, official CIPS reporting procedures. While the operational fear of retaliation is common, standard whistleblowing protocols are specifically engineered to protect the individual reporting the misconduct. The rule of compliance is absolute here. Detecting an unethical practice without reporting it is structurally identical to complicity. Remaining silent when a red flag is confirmed is an explicit, punishable breach of the CIPS Code of Conduct. Silence inherently protects the misconduct, allowing it to fester and spread. Reporting actively protects the targeted individuals, the organization's legal standing, and your own professional integrity. The most advanced detection system in the global supply chain is entirely useless if the professionals operating it lack the required mandate and the personal courage to escalate the risks they find. This brings us to the final structural peak of the model, representing the highest standard of professional conduct, ethical leadership. Ethical leadership is the capacity to maintain complete integrity under intense competing operational pressures. To test this leadership, we use the customs dilemma. The variables. A supplier offers a facilitation payment to clear goods faster. Concurrently, you notice poor working conditions. Operations warns refusal delays shipments, missing targets. Finally, the supplier claims it's standard local practice. This dilemma represents the ultimate realistic clash. You face immense operational pressure to deliver targets, placed in direct conflict with the legal baseline of the ethics pyramid. We apply the 5-step ethical check. Pass the dilemma through the gates. Is it legal, transparent, objective? Would it pass the front page test? Does it protect trust? Any hesitation triggers an operational halt. The output? Refuse the payment, report the concerns, and suspend the supplier. True ethical leadership is tested most severely when the rules feel ambiguous and the pressure is highest. Professionals must actively rely on rigorous frameworks, like the 5-step check, to cut through the noise, enforce the baseline, and protect their organizations. Trust in a global supply chain takes decades to build, yet a single compromised point, a localized bribe, or a hidden instance of modern slavery, and collapse that entire network in an instant. Procurement manages the entry point of every supplier relationship, functioning as the primary filter against exploitation. A common professional misconception suggests that ethical compliance is a matter of avoiding illegal acts, simply keeping one's own records clean. In reality, silence in the face of unethical behavior enables misconduct. Choosing not to act when risks are identified represents a systemic breach of professional duty. Ethical procurement is an active defensive discipline. It requires professionals to identify and eliminate vulnerabilities before they manifest as crises. This proactive requirement is the core of CIPS Commitment 3, the mandate to promote the eradication of unethical practices from the supply chain. This mandate requires enforcing a zero-tolerance policy against all forms of bribery and financial corruption. Beyond financial crime, the code requires mapping supply tiers to identify and neutralize human exploitation risks before a formal complaint is ever filed. Operationalizing this commitment involves mapping specific threat vectors, establishing early warning systems, and applying a deterministic framework to high-stakes dilemmas. Mastering these steps ensures procurement functions protect vulnerable people and corporate integrity through every contract cycle. These risks fall into two distinct categories. On the financial side, the dashboard tracks bribery, systemic corruption, and the use of facilitation payments in international logistics. Facilitation payments are small, unofficial transactions designed to accelerate standard processes, such as clearing goods through customs. The human exploitation vector includes forced labor, child labor, and unsafe working conditions, often hidden within secondary or tertiary supplier tiers. Willful ignorance offers no protection. Indirect involvement triggers legal liability. To manage this, procurement monitors early warning indicators called red flags. Financial flags include unusual payments or unverified agents. Human rights flags manifest as restricted worker movement, poor conditions, or audit refusals. Continuous supplier due diligence and auditable documentation provide the necessary defense against these vectors. Recognizing these red flags is a required competency. Ignorance does not shield an organization from the resulting reputational collapse. This incident report details the customs dilemma involving a critical supplier operating in a high-risk region. The supplier requests a small facilitation payment to clear urgent goods through local customs, citing a critical deadline. During a site visit, the procurement manager observes facility conditions falling below basic safety standards. The supplier defends these observations as standard local practice for both payments and labor conditions. Internally, the operations team warns that any shipment delay will cause the organization to miss its quarterly delivery targets. This intersection, where delivery targets meet systemic exploitation, is the definitive test of procurement integrity. Resolving this dilemma requires the 5-step ethical check, a deterministic framework designed to remove subjective hesitation. The first gate asks, is it legal? It is not. Regardless of local custom, facilitation payments violate international anti-bribery laws. The scenario then moves through the gates of transparency and fairness. Unrecorded payments and exploitative conditions fail both tests, as they rely on bypassing objective evaluation and oversight. Finally, we apply the public scrutiny test. Could the enterprise survive these practices being exposed on the front page of the news? The decision rule is clear. Hesitation on any single metric within these 5 steps mandates an immediate halt to operations. For the customs dilemma, the professional must refuse the payment, suspend the supplier engagement, and initiate a full audit. The 5-step ethical check transforms ambiguity into an actionable resolution, protecting the professional from internal operational pressure. Once the unethical practice is rejected, the remaining obligation is formal notification through internal channels or CIPS whistleblowing procedures. Failing to report the supplier's actions is itself a breach of the CIPS Code of Conduct. Misconduct persists in silence. Formal reporting shifts the risk away from the professional and protects the organization's integrity. This framework forms the procurement ethics pyramid. It begins with the baseline of legal compliance and anti-bribery law. The middle tier adds operational integrity through continuous due diligence and reporting. At the peak sits ethical leadership, moving beyond compliance to generate sustainable stakeholder trust. Integrity is tested when operational pressure is high, and no explicit rule dictates the immediate path forward. Upholding a strict zero-tolerance standard provides the stability required for long-term supply chain trust and vital institutional survival.